The year was 2237, and humanity was living in a time of growth. Cities on Mars were filled with lights that shone like stars against the red dust. On the moons of Jupiter, domes spread wider every year. The dream of living among the stars was no longer only a dream. For the first time in history, humans felt they were not only surviving but rising. Trade routes moved between planets, and ships carried both goods and stories. Then the sky changed. On a quiet evening above Earth, satellites picked up strange signals. At first, many thought it was simple static, but the signals grew clearer. Patterns appeared, pulses of energy arranged with purpose. A fleet was moving toward the solar system. At first no one believed it. The distance between stars was vast. For generations, people thought no one else could cross it. Yet the signals were there, steady and growing stronger. When the fleet finally entered the system, telescopes captured images that left the people of Earth silent. Enormous ships, larger than any human had built, moved with grace. Their hulls shone with silver light, as if they were forged from the heart of a star. The strangers did not hide their approach. They moved directly toward Earth, confident and calm. Within days, they arrived. Their leader did not walk among humans but appeared through a broadcast that covered every screen. The being was tall and radiant, with features that seemed both familiar and strange. Its voice was not harsh. Instead, it carried calm strength, the tone of one who expected to be obeyed. The message was simple. The Solari had come. They ruled hundreds of worlds. They commanded fleets that had never known defeat. Every species they met had accepted their rule, for resistance was seen as folly. The Solari offered peace under their law. Humanity would kneel, as others had done, and be protected as long as they served. If they refused, the Solari warned, humanity would be removed from the stars forever. The broadcast ended. For several moments, silence covered the world. On Earth, leaders gathered in the global assembly. Arguments rose quickly. Some believed resistance was impossible. They spoke of how advanced the Solari ships were, how easily their weapons could destroy entire fleets. Others argued that surrender would mean the end of freedom. Humanity had just begun to build among the stars. To kneel now would mean everything they had worked for would belong to another. Across colonies on Mars and Titan, the reaction was no less divided. Miners on Titan cursed the Solari and swore never to bow. Families on Mars feared war, for they knew their fragile domes could not withstand bombardment. Yet in both places, a spirit began to stir. People remembered history. Humanity had never been a people who accepted chains without a fight. Among the fleets stationed in orbit, young officers gathered to talk. They studied the images of Solari ships, measuring their size, guessing their weapons. Many felt fear, but others spoke of opportunity. Humanity had always faced impossible odds. From the first explorers who crossed oceans, to the settlers who braved frozen worlds, humans had always stepped forward where others might turn back. One of these officers was Myra, captain of the warship Resolute. She stood on her bridge, watching the alien broadcast play again and again. Her crew waited for her words. Myra finally spoke with quiet certainty. Humanity had been given a choice, kneel or rise. She told her crew that no matter what the leaders decided, she would not bow. The crew stood with her, their voices strong. The news spread. Across outposts and cities, the people began to prepare in their own ways. Farmers on Mars gathered tools that might one day serve as weapons. Engineers on Luna spoke of building new defenses. Pilots whispered of flying against the impossible. The Solari, meanwhile, waited with patience. To them, this was not a war. They had seen countless species before, and all had chosen surrender. They believed humanity would soon accept the truth of their power. They waited not because they feared, but because they expected obedience. But the Solari did not understand what kind of people they had met. Humanity was divided by arguments, but united by spirit. Even in fear, they held to a stubborn pride. They had crossed deserts, climbed mountains, and reached worlds where no life had been before. They had always carried a fire that burned against surrender. And so the first seeds of resistance were planted. From Earth to the colonies, people began to whisper the same words: humanity would not kneel. The stars had sent a demand, but humanity would answer in their own way. The arrival of the Solari had shaken the system. Yet in that shaking, something stronger began to grow. A will that was not born from ships or weapons, but from the hearts of people who had always fought to stand free. The armada had not yet gathered. The battles had not yet begun. But the choice had been made. Humanity would face the storm, no matter how great it was. The stars had demanded submission, but the people of Earth and its colonies carried only one thought. If they were to fall, they would fall standing. The Solari ships hung above Earth and its colonies like silent mountains of light. They did not strike, and they did not move away. Instead, they waited with the confidence of rulers who believed the end was already decided. Every day their silver hulls glowed against the dark, and every hour their presence pressed heavier on the hearts of humanity. Then, without warning, their leader returned to the screens. The broadcast covered Earth, Mars, Titan, Luna, and every station across the system. The alien stood tall, its face calm and its voice steady. "You will kneel," the leader declared, "as countless before you have done. Your species has reached the stars, but the stars belong to us. If you accept our law, you will live. If you resist, your name will be erased. You have 7 days to answer." The words were not shouted. They carried no rage. They were spoken with certainty, as though resistance was not even a possibility. When the broadcast ended, the silence across humanity was deeper than before. On Earth, the global assembly met again. The great chamber was filled with leaders from every nation. Screens showed representatives from colonies far away. The debate was fierce. Some leaders spoke of surrender. They said humanity had worked too hard to be destroyed now. They believed survival was more important than pride. To them, kneeling was not the end, but a chance to endure until humanity was stronger. Others refused to even consider it. They said no empire had the right to own humanity. To kneel would be to give away the very soul of their people. They pointed to history, to the times when humans had faced tyrants on Earth and had stood against them. They argued that if humanity surrendered now, their children would never know freedom. The room shook with voices, but no agreement was reached. While leaders argued, the message spread among ordinary people. In the streets of Earth, crowds gathered before public screens. On Mars, miners stopped their work to watch. On Titan, children in the domes listened with wide eyes as their parents whispered of war. Everywhere the ultimatum was heard, everywhere the people carried the same question: would humanity kneel or fight? Among the fleets, tension grew. Captains studied the alien ships, trying to understand their weapons. Officers spoke quietly in mess halls, their voices low but firm. Most of them feared the power of the Solari, yet none wished to bend before it. On the flagship Resolute, Captain Myra walked the length of her bridge. The crew watched her carefully. They knew she was a voice many would follow. Myra stopped before the screen where the alien's face had been shown. Her hands clenched behind her back. Then she spoke to her crew. "They expect us to kneel. They believe we will surrender because others have. But we are not others. We are human, and we will stand." The words spread quickly across the fleet. Messages traveled from ship to ship, from captain to captain. Some officers warned that speaking so boldly was dangerous. Yet most agreed that humanity had only one real choice. To fight was to risk destruction, but to kneel was to lose everything without even a battle. In the colonies, people began to prepare in small ways. On Luna, engineers worked through the night, sketching designs for stronger shields. On Mars, workshops turned mining drills into weapons. On Titan, pilots volunteered for training, knowing their fragile domes would be among the first targets. None of these efforts could match the might of the Solari, but each step built courage. The Solari, watching from above, saw all of this. Yet they did not strike. They believed it was only the noise of fear. Every species they had conquered had resisted with words in the beginning. The Solari were sure that when the seventh day came, humanity would kneel as all the others had. But among the stars of the human fleet, there was a different spirit. Captains swore to one another that even if Earth itself surrendered, the fleets would not. They would take their ships, their crews, and fight as long as they could. To them, honor was not in victory but in refusing submission. As the days passed, the people of Earth grew restless. Some prayed for peace, others demanded war. Children painted pictures of ships rising against the invaders. Workers sang songs of defiance in the fields and factories. The ultimatum that was meant to break them had instead given them fire. On the eve of the seventh day, the global assembly still had no decision. But in the silence of space, the fleets had already chosen. Captain Myra and her officers gathered in the war room of the Resolute. They looked at maps of the system, at the Solari positions, at the fragile colonies they must defend. Myra placed her hand on the table. "Whatever our leaders decide, we will not kneel," she said. "The Armada will rise." Her officers nodded, their faces steady. The choice was made, and no words from the Solari could change it now. The ultimatum had been given, but instead of fear it had awakened defiance. Humanity might not have the largest ships or the strongest weapons, but it carried something the Solari did not understand. A will to stand free, even against the impossible. The seventh day was coming, and with it the first spark of war. The seventh day came, and no message of surrender was sent. Humanity had spoken not with words but with silence. The Solari ships above Earth waited for obedience, but instead they saw movement in every corner of the system. Shipyards burned with light, colonies echoed with the sound of work, and across the black of space, human fleets began to gather. On Mars, great factories turned their machines away from farming equipment and focused on war. Miners and builders who had spent their lives shaping metal for peaceful use now shaped it for ships of battle. Old transport vessels were stripped of cargo holds and fitted with weapons. Engines once made for long journeys were pushed to their limits, turned into drives built for war. On Luna, engineers worked without rest. They studied captured fragments of Solari signals and searched for weaknesses. Their minds raced faster than their hands could move. They spoke of shields, of railguns, of traps hidden in asteroids. Each design was rough and imperfect, but each one carried the hope that humanity would not face the storm unarmed. On Titan, the frozen moon trembled with new activity. Pilots trained day and night, learning to fly in patterns that could outmaneuver larger ships. Simulators showed them battles they might not win, but still they flew again and again. For every pilot who grew tired, 10 more stepped forward. And above Earth, the fleets gathered. Old cruisers with scarred hulls, patrol ships once used to protect trade, and new warships born from the shipyards all joined together. The Armada did not look sleek or perfect. Some ships were patched with plates of different colors. Others carried weapons bolted on in haste. Yet when seen together, they carried a strength the Solari did not expect. Captain Myra stood on the bridge of the Resolute as the Armada formed. Her eyes moved across the display, where one by one the ships of humanity took their places. She saw ships from Earth orbit, from Mars, from Titan, from the farthest outposts where people had risked everything to build new homes. They came in numbers greater than she had believed possible. Her first officer, a steady man named Ren, stood at her side. "They are not ready for this fight," he said quietly. "No," Myra answered, "but they are ready to stand." The words spread through the crew. Each one carried the same thought. Victory was uncertain, but defiance was sure. News of the Armada's rise reached the people of Earth and the colonies. In the cities of Mars, children climbed rooftops to watch the ships launch. In the domes of Titan, families gathered to cheer as pilots left for training. On Earth, millions looked to the sky each night, where faint lights marked the gathering fleet. For the first time, fear was not the only feeling in their hearts. Pride began to burn as well. The Solari observed with calm eyes. Their leaders studied the human ships and measured their strength. To them, the Armada looked weak. Their own fleets were larger, faster, and armed with technology far beyond human reach. But what the Solari could not measure was the spirit inside those imperfect ships. As the Armada grew, so did the bond between its captains. They spoke through secure channels, sharing plans and promises. Some were veterans who had seen battles on Earth before humanity reached the stars. Others were young and had never known war. Yet all of them swore the same oath: humanity would fight, and humanity would not kneel. In secret places, strategies were drawn. Small fleets would hide among the asteroids. Freighters, disguised as harmless, would carry hidden weapons. Stations in the outer system would be turned into traps. Humanity knew it could not face the Solari with power alone. It would have to use speed, wit, and the unshakable will to fight until the last. Captain Myra gathered her officers one evening in the war room of the Resolute. Around the table, maps of the solar system glowed. Red marks showed the Solari blockade. Blue marks showed human ships. The balance was not even. The Solari stretched across the skies like a wall. The humans were a line that could easily be broken. Myra looked at each officer. We do not have more guns. We do not have stronger armor. But we have something they cannot understand. We choose to stand. That choice gives us strength. Remember that, when the battle begins. Her officers bowed their heads in agreement. Some felt fear, but none doubted her words. Outside the war room, the ships of the Armada prepared for the coming storm. Engineers welded plates. Pilots checked their controls. Soldiers packed supplies. Every person, from the youngest recruit to the oldest captain, knew that the days ahead would test them beyond anything they had faced. The Solari's ultimatum had been clear. Humanity had 7 days to kneel. The 7 days had passed, and humanity's answer was rising in the black skies. The Armada was not the largest force the galaxy had seen, but it was something the Solari had never faced before. It was a fleet born not from conquest, but from refusal. It was a fleet of people who would fight not to rule others, but to remain free themselves. The Solari believed this war would end quickly. The humans knew it would not. They were preparing for the long struggle, and in every corner of the system, one truth was spoken again and again. Humanity stands, or humanity falls, but never on its knees. The Armada was ready, but the Solari did not wait long to test it. Only days after the fleets of humanity had gathered, a formation of Solari warships broke from the main force. They moved with smooth precision, their silver hulls shining as if untouched by time. The Solari did not send their full strength. They sent only a fraction, confident that even this small force would be enough to crush human resistance. Their target was the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. The belt was rich with rocks that miners had worked for decades, carving tunnels and leaving behind empty husks. The Solari believed humans might use the asteroids for cover. They intended to sweep through quickly, destroy whatever resistance hid there, and prove that fighting them was hopeless. But the Solari were not the only ones who studied the belt. Humans had lived there for generations. They knew its paths, its shadows, and its secrets. Miners and engineers had turned the asteroids into more than homes. They had turned them into weapons. When the Solari fleet entered the belt, silence filled the void. Their scanners swept through rocks and dust, but nothing appeared at first. They advanced deeper, their engines burning bright. Then, without warning, the first trap was sprung. Hidden charges buried in the rocks detonated all at once. Shards of stone exploded outward, tearing into the sleek hulls of the alien ships. A Solari cruiser spun out of formation, its engines smoking. Another was struck by a wave of debris that shattered part of its armor. The aliens had expected a clear path. Instead, the belt itself became their enemy. From the shadows, human frigates darted forward. They were smaller and weaker, but they moved with the speed of hunters. Their weapons fired in tight bursts, aimed not at the strongest points but at the weakest joints of the Solari hulls. Explosions flared as two alien escorts broke apart. The Solari reacted quickly. Their ships turned and fired beams of burning light that cut through stone as if it were nothing. Several human frigates were destroyed in moments, torn apart before their crews could even cry out. But the others did not retreat. They weaved between rocks, vanishing before the beams could strike again. Above the chaos, Captain Myra commanded the Resolute. Her voice was calm as she ordered her crew to hold formation. The Resolute was larger than the frigates and carried heavier weapons, but Myra knew this battle was not about power. It was about showing the Solari that humanity would not break. "Target the lead ship," she said. The gunners obeyed. The Resolute's cannons roared, sending a stream of fire across the void. The lead Solari ship staggered under the attack. Its shields flickered, then failed. Myra gave the order, and every nearby human ship turned its weapons on the same target. Together, they struck with fury. The alien vessel exploded in a burst of silver flame. For the first time, a Solari warship had been destroyed by human hands. Cheers rose from the crews of the fleet, but their joy was short. The Solari answered with brutal force. Their beams cut through another wave of human frigates, and the belt shook with the clash of fire and stone. Yet humanity did not stop. The traps continued. Mines hidden deep within tunnels exploded when the Solari drew too close. Freighters disguised as harmless suddenly revealed weapons and rammed into enemy ships, sacrificing themselves to cripple the invaders. Every rock seemed to hide danger, every shadow a human ship waiting to strike. The Solari had expected an easy victory. Instead, they found themselves dragged into a battle where every step forward cost them blood and steel. For hours, the fight raged. Ships burned. Crews gave their lives. The black sky of the belt lit with fire again and again. At last, the Solari withdrew. Their ships turned away, engines burning as they fled the deadly maze. They left behind wreckage that drifted among the stones, the first proof that they were not untouchable. When the surviving human ships gathered after the battle, the losses were heavy. Many frigates had been destroyed. Hundreds of men and women had given their lives. But the armada still stood, and their victory carried weight far greater than numbers. On the bridge of the Resolute, Myra looked across the damaged fleet. Her crew was tired, their faces marked with grief, but their eyes still burned. She spoke quietly, but every word carried to the ships through the comms. "Today, we showed them we will not kneel. Today, we proved they can bleed." The message spread through the colonies, and with it came hope. For the first time, humanity had faced the Solari and forced them back. The galaxy had whispered that no one could resist them. Now the galaxy had seen otherwise. The Solari still had greater power, greater numbers, and greater reach. But their perfect record of conquest had been broken. Humanity had struck a blow, and in that blow was a promise. The war was only beginning, but the spirit of resistance had already written its first victory. The asteroid belt battle had changed everything. For the first time in centuries, the Solari had been forced to retreat. To them, it was only a minor setback, but to humanity, it was a spark of hope. The people of Earth and the colonies now believed that victory was not impossible. They sang songs of the brave frigates, they told stories of the traps hidden in the rocks, and they spoke the name of Captain Myra with pride. But the Solari were not finished. If anything, the defeat had only sharpened their resolve. Their empire had been built on fear and obedience. To them, one loss was not only a wound but a threat. If humanity could resist, others might try the same. That could not be allowed. Soon after, Solari fleets spread across the system. They attacked outer colonies, destroyed small stations, and cut trade routes. Their strategy was not simply to crush humanity but to exhaust it. They wanted to break the spirit that had risen after the first clash. Where humans built, the Solari burned. Where humans defended, the Solari blockaded. The war became a struggle not only of ships and weapons but of will. On Mars, cities lived in fear of bombardment. Families carried their lives into shelters each night, never knowing if the morning would come. Still, workers returned to the factories to build weapons. On Titan, pilots who had survived training faced real battles. Many did not return, but new volunteers stepped forward without hesitation. On Luna, engineers labored harder than ever, designing new traps and weapons to replace what had been lost. Captain Myra led the Resolute through these dark days. Her fleet struck where it could, hitting supply lines, breaking blockades, and vanishing before Solari reinforcements could arrive. Each raid was small compared to the vastness of the Solari Empire, but each one carried meaning. It told the people that the Armada still stood. The Solari grew frustrated. They had faced species with larger armies, but none had fought with such defiance. The more they destroyed, the stronger the humans seemed to become in spirit. Captains who should have surrendered chose instead to ram their ships into Solari vessels, taking the enemy with them. Small outposts refused to raise white flags, even when surrounded. Everywhere the Solari looked, they found not obedience but resistance. The war turned into a test of patience. The Solari pressed harder, trying to force submission. The humans refused, even as the cost grew unbearable. On Earth, the Global Assembly met again. This time, the chamber was filled not with loud arguments but with tired faces. The leaders had watched colonies burn, had read lists of the dead, and still they could not bring themselves to surrender. For every voice that whispered of peace, 10 more answered that peace under chains was no peace at all. Among ordinary people, the war shaped daily life. Children learned to carry supplies, families hid food in case of shortages, and whole towns moved underground. Yet in every corner, people repeated the same words: humanity will not kneel. The Solari could not understand this. Their empire had been built on fear. They had always believed that when enough suffering was given, resistance would end. But with humanity, suffering seemed only to sharpen defiance. In one battle near Neptune, a small squadron of human ships held off an entire Solari fleet long enough for civilians to escape. Every ship in the squadron was destroyed, but not before they had saved thousands of lives. The Solari commander who faced them returned to his fleet in silence, troubled for the first time in his long service. Captain Myra knew the war was far from won. She felt the weight of every life lost. Each time she stood on the bridge of the Resolute, she thought of the ships that no longer stood beside her. Yet she also knew that their sacrifices carried meaning. Each loss reminded the galaxy that humans were not like the others who had bowed. The galaxy itself had begun to watch. Other species, long silent under Solari rule, whispered of the humans. They spoke of the battle in the asteroid belt, of the raids, of the captains who fought until their last breath. For the first time in centuries, the Solari faced not only a military challenge but a challenge to their reputation. This was no longer only a war of ships. It was a war of wills. The Solari wanted to prove that resistance was useless. Humanity wanted to prove that freedom was worth any cost. Neither side would bend. The battles grew harsher, the skies burned brighter, and still the fight continued. On the bridge of the Resolute, Myra stood with her crew after another hard battle. Around them, the wreckage of both human and Solari ships drifted silently. The stars were filled with scars of fire. Ren, her first officer, looked at her with weary eyes. "How long can we keep this up?" he asked. Myra answered without hesitation. "As long as it takes." Her words carried beyond her ship. They became the message of the Armada, a message that reached every colony, every outpost, and every heart. Humanity might fall, but if it did, it would fall standing. The war was not over. It was only beginning to show its true shape. The Solari had the strength of empires. The humans had the strength of will. The universe waited to see which would prove stronger. The war dragged on, and the system was filled with fire. Battles were fought in the asteroid belt, near the icy moons of Jupiter, and in the skies above Saturn. Each clash left wreckage drifting in silence, the graves of both humans and Solari. Yet still, humanity did not kneel. The Solari grew impatient. Their empire had never faced resistance this long. They believed humanity had to be broken with one final blow. To do this, they brought their greatest weapon, a ship the size of a floating city. It was a super dreadnought, armed with weapons that could shatter moons and shielded with energy stronger than any defense humans had ever seen. To the Solari, this ship was the symbol of their power. They believed no human fleet could stand against it. The dreadnought entered the orbit of Saturn. Its shadow stretched across the rings, a warning to all who looked upon it. Behind it came escorts, smaller but still mighty ships. The Solari broadcast their message again. "This is the end. You cannot resist what we bring. Surrender now, or watch your system burn." But humanity had already chosen. They would not kneel. The Armada gathered for what all knew could be the last battle. From Earth, from Mars, from Titan, and from the farthest stations, every ship that could still fly joined the fleet. Some were scarred from past battles, some barely held together with repairs, but all came forward. They formed a line near the rings of Saturn, their engines burning bright. On the Resolute, Captain Myra stood before her crew. She looked at their faces, tired yet steady. She knew many of them might not live to see the end of the battle. Yet she also knew that they would not falter. "This is the moment," she said. "The Solari believe they will crush us with fear. We will show them that humanity does not break. We fight not only for ourselves but for every child who dreams of freedom. If we fall standing. But I promise you this, today, they will know we are not theirs to command." Her words spread across the Armada. Pilots, engineers, soldiers, and captains carried them in their hearts as the Solari advanced. The battle began with thunder. The dreadnought fired first, a beam of energy that tore through a human cruiser and split it apart in seconds. The light of the blast reflected across the rings of Saturn. The humans answered at once, swarming forward with every ship they had. Frigates weaved through the debris, striking at the escorts. Cruisers fired volley after volley, trying to weaken the dreadnought's shields. The dreadnought moved slowly but with terrible strength. Each time it fired, another human ship was destroyed. Yet still the Armada pushed forward. From the shadows of the rings, hidden mines detonated, blasting fragments of ice and rock into the path of the escorts. Several Solari ships were torn apart, their sleek hulls ripped open by the storm of debris. Human ships dove through the chaos, striking quickly before vanishing again into the cover of the rings. The dreadnought's shields flared, glowing bright with each impact, but they held. No matter how many weapons struck, the giant vessel endured. Myra watched from the Resolute. Her ship fired again and again, but the shields refused to break. She knew they had to strike harder, closer, and with more sacrifice than ever before. "Target the dreadnought's core," she ordered. The Resolute led the charge, plunging into the heart of the battle. Other ships followed, forming a spear of fire that pierced toward the giant. Explosions lit the black skies as human ships fell one after another, but the spear kept moving forward. The Resolute reached the dreadnought and unleashed its full firepower. The shields flickered, faltered, but did not fall. The Solari vessel turned its great guns on the Resolute. The ship shook as blasts tore across its hull. Alarms rang, smoke filled the bridge, and still Myra stood firm. Ren, her first officer, looked at her with grim eyes. The shields will not break. Not like this. Myra nodded. She had known, deep inside, that this might be the truth. The dreadnought could not be defeated from a distance. It would have to be brought down another way. She gave the final order. Set a course for the core. Prepare to ram. The crew understood. There was no hesitation. The Resolute turned sharply, engines burning brighter than ever. It surged forward, ignoring the blasts tearing into its hull. Every weapon fired at once, not to destroy the dreadnought, but to open the path. Then the Resolute struck. The impact shook the heavens. The dreadnought's shields collapsed under the force. The Resolute pierced its hull and drove into its heart. For one breathless moment, the two ships were locked together. Then the explosion came. Light brighter than the sun burst across the rings of Saturn. The dreadnought was torn apart, its mighty frame breaking into pieces. The Resolute was gone, consumed in the blast, but its sacrifice had brought victory. When the fire faded, the surviving human ships floated in silence. The dreadnought, the pride of the Solari, was nothing more than wreckage. Across the Armada, grief and triumph mixed. They had lost their flagship, their captain, and countless brave souls. Yet they had done the impossible. They had destroyed the weapon the Solari believed could never be defeated. The Solari fleets pulled back, stunned. For the first time in their long reign, they had been forced to retreat not by power greater than theirs, but by will stronger than their own. The breaking point had come, and humanity had not bent. The silence after the destruction of the Solari dreadnought stretched long across the system. The stars above Saturn seemed to burn brighter, as if they bore witness to what had happened. For the first time in centuries, the Solari turned their fleets away in defeat. Humanity had not kneeled. Humanity had refused. The wreckage of the Resolute drifted among the broken pieces of the dreadnought. The crew's sacrifice echoed in every corner of the Armada. Though grief was heavy, it was carried with pride. Stories of Captain Myra and her final commands spread faster than light signals. Even before the survivors returned home, Earth already knew. Humanity had struck down the pride of the Solari Empire. The Armada limped back to Earth orbit. Many ships bore scars, and many would never fly again. But the cheers that greeted them were louder than any sorrow. Cities across the planet lit their skies with beacons of light. On Mars, crowds filled the domes, raising banners that read "We Stand." On the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, workers stopped their labor to watch the news streams. They saw the burning wreckage of the Solari dreadnought and felt hope where once there had only been fear. For generations, humans had believed themselves small before the powers of the galaxy. Now they believed something different. They had proven that strength was not only measured in weapons but in the will to resist. The Solari, far from Earth, faced their own reckoning. Their leaders struggled to explain how a young species had defied them. Their commanders whispered doubts. If humans could bring down their strongest ship, what else might they achieve if left to rise? Fear began to spread in their empire, a fear not of humanity's armies but of their spirit. On Earth, the leaders of the United Colonies gathered to honor the fallen. A memorial was built in orbit, where the broken hull of the Resolute was turned into a monument. Its shattered steel was reforged into an arch that shone in the sunlight. Beneath it, the names of all who had given their lives were carved. Families came to lay flowers, and children touched the names with reverence. The memorial became more than a symbol of war. It became a reminder that freedom was not given but earned. Ren, who had survived only because he had been on another ship during the final strike, stood before the memorial often. He carried the memory of Myra's last words. He knew the burden of leadership had now passed to him and to others like him. Humanity would need new captains, new voices to guide the armada. And though the grief still lived in his heart, he also carried pride. Myra had given her life not for death but for the future. The armada was rebuilt slowly. Ships were repaired, new vessels were launched, and training academies filled with recruits. Young men and women volunteered in great numbers, inspired by the tales of the battle at Saturn. They did not dream of conquest but of protection. They swore never again to allow any power to demand their people kneel. Years passed, and the story of that war became legend. Songs were sung of the burning rings of Saturn, where humans had stood against the empire of the stars. Poems told of the resolute charging into the dreadnought's heart. Parents told their children of the day humanity refused, and the children listened with shining eyes. Even beyond the solar system, whispers spread. Other species, long bound under Solari rule, heard of humanity's defiance. In secret, they repeated the story, and in their hearts, they began to wonder if they too could rise. The Solari tried to silence these whispers, but the tale of humans who refused to kneel could not be erased. It traveled like fire across dry grass, unstoppable and alive. In time, the Solari Empire grew cautious in its dealings with Earth. They no longer spoke as masters. They treated humanity with wary respect, for they had learned that humanity would rather burn in defiance than live in chains. And humanity, though scarred, did not let pride become arrogance. The leaders remembered the cost of that victory. They remembered the lives lost, the ships shattered, the families grieving. They understood that freedom was not a prize won once but a duty to be guarded forever. One night, Ren stood again at the memorial arch in orbit. Below him, Earth glowed blue and green, the home that had given birth to the courage of an entire people. He thought of Myra, of her steady voice and her unyielding gaze. He thought of the thousands who had stood beside her and of the millions who now lived free because of them. He whispered quietly, though no one could hear. "We did not kneel. And we never will." The stars shone above him, vast and unending. Somewhere out there, the Solari still ruled, still believed themselves masters of the galaxy. But Ren knew now what all of humanity knew. The stars could demand their surrender, but humanity would always refuse. And so the legacy was set. Not of conquest, not of empire, but of defiance. The day the Armada stood at Saturn, the day the Resolute struck the Dreadnought, became the day that defined humanity. It was the day they proved that no matter the power that came against them, their spirit could not be broken. The future remained uncertain, but one truth was written forever in the memory of the stars. Humanity would never kneel.